I'm Jan Brandvold. Welcome to day 5 of Viva La Vegan. Today we're going to talk about a monster machine that many of you have in your garage or your pantry and you're just not using, and that's a bread machine. Part of the reason that people quit using their machines is they, for some reason, quit having success with their bread. So today I'm going to show you a great recipe that my husband, Chris, developed all by himself and uses occasionally to make delicious bread. The machine has a pan in it, and we put things in order. I'm going to bring the pan here so that I can show you what I'm doing with it. Normally you can just leave it in the pan. First thing first tip is you need to put the ingredients in a particular order. Put in all the liquids first in the bottom. So I'm starting with 1.5 cups of lukewarm water, and then I have a teaspoon of vanilla, three tablespoons of agave syrup, okay, that was 1 tablespoon of oil, and now 3 tablespoons of the agave syrup. And our final liquid ingredient is 1 egg worth of egg replacer. And all these things go right in the bottom, and we'll be putting our flour on top. Now I want to talk just for a minute about flour, because this recipe calls for 1 cup of whole wheat flour, 1 1/4 cups of whole wheat pastry flour, 1 1/4 cup of bread flour, and 1/3 cup enhancer or vital gluten flour, it's also known as. The pastry flour, the whole wheat flours are self-explanatory, but the reason you want to use bread flour is because bread flour is a little higher in protein, not much, but enough that it makes a difference in the texture and taste of your bread. And it has a little bit of barley flour in it, plus some vitamin C or potassium bromate. And all these things will go to help your bread rise higher, taste better. So bread flour is important. If you use all-purpose flour, it's a little lower protein, doesn't have the barley in it. You can use it, but your bread won't be the same. It might be a little chewier than nice light bread. It's very helpful to use bread flour when you're using the wheat flours. So my next set of ingredients will be all the flours. And that final flour was the vital wheat gluten, and as we know, the gluten is what gives it its stretch, and it's very important to have some gluten, and especially when you're using wheat flour, because wheat flour doesn't seem to be as stretchy. And so it's really good to add just 1 teaspoon per cup of flour, or, I'm sorry, 1 tablespoon per cup of flour. So this is about 1/3 of a cup of that, which I know if you're doing the math that didn't work, but 1/3 of a cup is what he figured out, what my husband figured out. Other dry ingredients include cinnamon, which now we're to the point where we don't want to be mixing some ingredients, and especially if you're going to leave your mixer on overnight and have it bake bread in the morning, which I gotta say, there aren't too many more pleasant scents to wake up to than this scent of bread in your home baking. But sprinkle it kind of around the edges, and the same with the salt. Sprinkle that around the edges. 1 teaspoon of salt, and that was 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, by the way. And the final ingredient, almost final ingredient I have to put in is the yeast. And I have a couple of hints for yeast, because that is the main reason that your bread fails in the bread machine, is that you're not using yeast properly, or it might be expired. I would never use any yeast if it's within 6 months of its expiration date. Mine I just bought this morning, and it's November of 2014, so I think I'm okay. But I just toss it if it's 6 months or less. And I always put the date that I open it. I keep a little permanent marker, and I'll put today's date down. And that way I know when it is. Now, yeast is live once it's opened, it's very sensitive to air and temperature. It needs to be cold. Preferably, it'll last the longest if you keep it in your freezer. It'll last 6 months in your freezer if you just don't have room, 4 months in the fridge. But what you need to do is measure out the amount you're going to use and put it right back in the freezer or fridge, because it's very sensitive to the temperature and it does not want to be freezing and thawing, because for sure it will die and your bread will be very flat. So measure out just what you need and then let it come to room temperature before you use it. So you might want to make that the first ingredient that you measure so that it has time to get acclimated. And then take a spoon and make yourself a little dip in the top of the flours that you have stacked. I'm not sure, can you see that? You can see that. And this will keep the yeast away from all other ingredients. It's pretty sensitive to salt and vanilla. So we'll just make a little volcano here and pour the yeast right into that, and then we'll put our pan into the machine. And the final ingredient that I have is raisins in this bread. It takes half a cup of raisins, and I forgot to say 2 teaspoons of yeast is how much I put in there. But if your machine doesn't have a dispenser to add the raisins, this is kind of nice because it mixes everything first and then adds the raisins in so they don't get crushed. But if your machine doesn't do that, just put them in anyway. They might get a little smushed, but it'll be fine. And this, we need to tell it the size of loaf usually, and you'll have to read your bread machine instructions. But if you're careful about the yeast and the flour that you use, make sure everything's nice and fresh, you'll get a great loaf of bread. So we'll show you this when it's done. There's a lot of other things you can use your machine for. They all involve dough, but just keep in mind you don't have to run it all the way through the cycle. Kyra's great at using hers for pizza dough and bread dough, like she makes dinner rolls and sweet rolls with it, and calzones and pizza. So just remember, you don't have to, you can just make the bread and then let it, make the dough and take it out before it bakes. That's it. I'm back. It's been 3 hours approximately since we put this bread in to cook. My house smells amazing. Even if this loaf was a total dud, it would be worth it for that. Let's see what we got. Oh my gosh. You won't believe. Make sure you don't touch the wire when you pull your bread batter out. This is one gorgeous loaf of bread. I set it for medium. And I'm going to use another pot holder. And I'm just going to dump this out and see what happens. Nicely, the blade did not stick. And all I need to do now is cool it. Well, I'll be putting it on a rack to cool it, but if you like your crust of your bread soft, you brush it with a little bit of Earth Balance. If you like it hard and crusty, then just leave it like it is and let it cool. Wonderful loaf of bread, raised perfectly, and I now have a confession to make. I have never used a bread machine before in my life. This is the kind of appliance you have sitting around and you look at it and you look at it and don't do anything with it. And I actually make my bread using the KitchenAid mixer, and I do it all by hand, and this would work just as well with that. But this was great to put the bread in and set it and forget it. So that's it for today. Have a nice weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.